You're listening to the Deltek Podcast, the show for leaders in project-driven industries where the stakes are always high and the margin for error is zero. In every episode, we bring you the data, the experts, and the insights that help you lead with speed, clarity, and control. Now, let's get into it.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Deltek Podcast. I'm Deniece Peterson. I'm VP of Research, leading federal, state, local education, and Canada market analysis here. And I've had the pleasure of being involved in our annual Clarity Government Contracting Industry Study, which is in its 17th year. I can't believe it. I've been involved for many years now, and it's always exciting to kind of hear directly from contractors. Today, I have someone with me who I describe as one of the most trusted practitioner voices, helping small and mid-sized contractors, a superwoman, CEO of Commodore Consulting, very engaged with the National Contract Management Association at many different levels, and a returning contributor to the Deltek Clarity study. So thank you for that. Welcome, and thank you for being here. So let's just start. Tell me a little bit about Commodore Consulting and the work that you do.
All right. Yeah. So I've been in government procurement for over 30 years. I started out as a college audit intern. And then I spent some time as a contract specialist at Wright Pat Air Force Base in Ohio. And through those experiences of actually being on the government side and transitioning to the contractor side, where my first major role was the regional contract administrator for TRICARE, I said, businesses really want to do good work. They are just overwhelmed by the process and trying to understand everything out. So Commodore Consulting was created to help businesses understand how to do the work in accordance with the contracts requirements and just simplify that process for them by working with them to create strategies, pricing, training, as well as negotiations and GSA schedules.
That's such important work, especially for small companies trying to get into this very complicated market, right?
Yes, yes.
And so I've mentioned you work mainly with small and mid-sized contractors. So I'm interested in what like your typical week looks like. We're talking to companies, especially right now, after a lot of change that happened. What are their top of mind concerns as you're talking with them?
Right. So first I want to say that I work with large organizations as well. And what I see surprisingly is they all have the same concerns. One right now is understanding this urgency for AI adoption and governance. They see the benefit, but they're concerned about protecting the data, right? And learning and identifying where it should be integrated into their enterprise. And then also everyone is concerned about compliance. What procedures do I need to have in place to make sure that I am performing the work in accordance with the proposal, like I said, but also in accordance with these ever-changing government policies. Small businesses tend to have more risk in this area because they don't have as many resources, right? Whereas large businesses, usually have a dedicated legal staff, contract compliance, contract administration. So they're handling it differently based upon the resources that they have available to them, but they're all concerned about how is compliance affecting operations and my profitability, because I want to stay in the game.
Right. And that's great because we're going to talk about both of those things, AI and compliance.
Yeah.
So again, thank you for contributing to the study. Having experts kind of weigh in really helps enrich the report. So for those folks that haven't read the report yet, and now that you've had a chance to kind of see the final outcome, how would you describe what it is and, why it matters for contractors to take the time to read a report like this?
Right. I think it matters because clarity is essential to building a realistic foundation in which you're going to operate, plan strategies, create your finances and revenue, goals and infrastructure around that. And the reason I love this report is because it's not a lot of legalese and jargon. These are real people operating in the space just like me, just like you and others that are giving their real life perspective on, hey, this is what I see, and this is how I believe we can work toward a mutually beneficial solution. Understanding that we're all growing and learning, and we're taking the expertise that we have to build upon And then also learning how to collaborate so that we're stronger together while we're also meeting the mission of these government agencies. And I think we need that clarity from these different perspectives to be able to see what that is, because every business has their own unique set of services and products. So we can't be everywhere with every agency all the time. So this gives us those set of eyes in real time for these different perspectives to gather that understanding. And it's easier to understand as well because, like I said, you don't have all the complex terms and regulatory things. It's okay to read that, but just interpretation is different. So being able to see how it's actually applied gives another level of understanding that we can benefit from.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. And it's always good, I think, to be able to examine the environment and have something like this is so you can say, is it us or is it
Right.
is it the market? Like know where you should be focusing in on. So
Right.
when you had a chance to look at this year's findings, what was your reaction? Did anything surprise you in terms of the sentiment or any of the top pain points or initiatives or anything?
Yeah, first I was like, wow, this is incredible. I thought this year, I think, was different in the sense that we've had such an evolution over the last year and a half or so. So to hear these different perspectives speak on how they've been navigating that was, I think, so very important. What really stood out to me too is we see some of the common things, right? Strategy, pursuing the right opportunity, and teaming. But what surprised me was that although GSA is now the centralized procurement function for federal government, the GWACs and vehicles were at the lower end, right? From that perspective of, how people are planning to move forward. That surprised me. And then the other surprise was 90% of them said they had AI adoption because I am conducting AI training for government agency staff as well as the contractors. And what I see is while there are a lot of people that have been adopting AI and trying to learn how to use it, is most of them are still lacking when it comes to understanding what to do about AI governance and understanding the best ways to use it. So those things really surprised me. I loved reading all of the comments and different perspectives because that's how we learn.
Yeah, those things surprise me too. So
Mhm.
I'm as an analyst in the conversation, I'm going to get into some data. So
Okay.
and it's very similar to what your takeaway was. Let me just say my
Mhm.
team and I were all over everything that it's our job, all over everything that happened last year, the
Mhm.
policy, the
Oh, yeah.
contract actions. And once
Mhm.
all the data was in, there was this interesting dichotomy where it felt, for most of us, it felt worse than it actually was. When you look on paper at the numbers, the spending, it was just kind of where things shifted. And it was interesting as we saw kind of the similar thing in the clarity study, that dichotomy of where it seemed like contractors are pretty optimistic. 15% said that their revenue grew in 2025, which is a bit surprising, and they're projecting 16% for this year. But then on the other hand, nearly 90%
Mhm.
reported at least one declining
Oh,
financial
yes.
metric or operational metric or something like that. And so we look at those things as well. We have something called the Government Contractor Confidence Index, where
Mhm.
it kind of measures the sentiment, and that
Mhm.
increased by about a point. So it's not what we would expect after a year like 2025, right?
Mhm.
So my question to you is, when you're sitting with contractors and looking at kind of the lay of the land as far as their business, and they're saying,
Mhm.
business is good, revenue's up, what are they telling you in terms of the navigation and the path they have to take to kind of maintain that level of revenue? Is it getting harder to make the same amount of revenue? Does the margins look different? They're good, but just different. What are you hearing in that regard?
So before getting into that, I want to differentiate a few things, right? So
Okay.
it depends on who you ask in terms of how much of a growth or what transpired over the last years. What I'm seeing from the small and medium size is that a lot of them were just trying to maintain, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were many that lost revenue or had revenue delayed because of contracts being terminated or contracts being put on hold. right? So it went from a transition of let me make sure I can at least maintain what a healthy level looks like to stay in business while I'm also continuing to strategize how am I going to grow in this new environment. What I also saw was, and this is part of why intentional strategy is so important to compared to just chasing every opportunity. What I also saw is more people becoming focused on who are our ideal customers and agencies. That's where we need to focus because you've got to, when you have limited resources and a limited budget, that's really what you need to do, right? It costs less to maintain and build a customer relationship than to create a new one. That's just statistically proven
Absolutely.
over and over. So what I saw was people taking another look and saying, where do we really need to focus? And then the revenue shifts that I saw came from focus, but also recognizing what missions are the ones that are taking priority right now, and how do I fit? How does my organization fit in terms of providing services or providing products, right? Because we know that there were different agencies that spent more money, whether it was, because of regular forecasts or because of urgencies based upon the new environment in which we have to operate. So I think we have to look at that too whenever we speak to numbers is what industries did most of this revenue increase come from? And where did what agencies did the revenue changes come from? Because you'll see some various things because we know some agencies had some shifts downward. So I just think it depends on what is the need, right? And what is the frequency of the need, right? When do these agencies need to have these contracts in place so that they either, they're in place in enough time to enable the warfighter or to help the general public, because that's what government contracting is about, right? It's divided into those two key areas. One, the military agencies, and then the other side, the civilian agencies. And when you focus on the missions from each one of those, where do those priorities lie? And that's really where I saw the shift from. And then you've got to identify relationships too, because when administration changes, it's normal that you're going to have personnel changes. So it's not just about maintaining credibility with who you already know, but building credibility with who replaced them and what their priorities and perspectives are. I think all of that came into play and having to do it quickly. That's what
Quickly,
made
yeah.
this so unique because everything was happening so fast. And oh, by the way, we have the revolutionary fire overhaul. So what rules do we have to play in?
Right.
That's a lot of major things happening at once.
A lot of change, a lot of quick
Mm.
strategy pivoting.
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
completely agree. And I think I want to add to your point about the customers they're supporting, whether it's customers that
Mm-hmm,
maintain and customers that help grow.
mm-hmm.
It's all about follow the mission and follow the money,
Yes, always.
and kind of see where. And we'll talk a little bit more about
Mm-hmm.
diversification in a second because I know a
Yes.
lot of
My
companies are
favorite.
doing that as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I know that not everyone kind of enjoyed this, very healthy, revenue and margin environment. And I know some companies were squeezed on that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering with, the clientele that you worked with, were you seeing any patterns in where maybe margin squeezes or kind of operational bottlenecks were happening in acquisitions, like pre-award,
Mm-hmm.
front end stuff, the pricing, teaming, negotiation, or was it like
Right.
delivery after award stuff that was kind of causing most problems?
I'm going to start out simple, then go into it a little deeper. There's 3 phases of the contract life cycle, right? Pre-award, award, and post-award. And, we've always been taught as a buyer, as contracting staff for the government, that the greatest risk to the government is the pre-award phase, because that's when you're creating the requirements, conducting market research, analyzing pricing, identifying the contract type, right, which is preferred to be fixed price, and et cetera. What I see that I've always felt and became more evident now is the pre-award phase is the greatest risk for everyone, buyer and seller, even government contractor. Because if you don't truly understand the mission and the environment in which you'll have to operate, which means people, access to systems, data requirements and deliverables, you're not going to correctly identify how the work needs to be done and what some additional tasks there may be, right? So as a buyer, as someone in contracts working with a team like a program manager and pricing, I'm not the expert on the need, right? I'm the one helping to navigate how we put these requirements together based upon my understanding of market conditions, industry standards, and what that, program office is telling me. So when you look at it from that perspective, as someone in contracting, if I'm writing the requirements, there may not be some things that I write explicitly to, but as an expert in the field, you should know that you're required to do, right? So when you don't fully understand the mission and the desired outcome and how it aligns with how you operate, there are going to be some challenges that move to the award and post-award phase. And I think that transitions into greater operational risk that could negatively affect profitability, right? So we've got to take the time as a seller or a contractor to be more intentional about identifying what that is, right? If I have to complete these tasks, what am I required? What do I do from steps A to Z? How does this work out in direct work and how does this work out in indirect work, right? Those people responsible for putting the reports together, managing the modifications. And then, oh, by the way, did you include, based upon your market research, how the market is changing through your period of performance, right? If you've got a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract, what is the marketplace going to look like in year 2 or year 3 or year 4? How did you price for that or, navigate with your project schedule and task? Because if you haven't handled that appropriately, you're going to be really surprised as you go through the contract and try to perform the work and manage it. And that's where I usually see the challenges that affect profitability and revenue is the operational risk, those operational aha moments, right?
That's great. Yeah, that's really great information. And speaking of, so everyone kind of wants to figure out how to continue to grow, obviously. Do you think we're now at a point where the default is growing revenue in an environment of shrinking margins? Or is this kind of something that's still feasible even in this kind of changing, shifting market?
I think it's feasible if you're honest about what your work requires and how much it's going to cost you to deliver. And here's the golden part of that, your capacity. So don't just chase every opportunity. Make sure that it aligns with your core offerings. It aligns with your customer relationships and understanding that how, the mission. And then what is your capacity, right? That also gets into the bid, no bid decision, right? Is it something you really need to bid on? If you bid on this project and you win, let's say project A, how is that going to affect your capacity and readiness for, let's say, another project in your pipeline that is even more profitable and aligns more with what you do? So we think of the power in the yes, but the power is also in the no because it's a timing and a capacity issue. And that's why we need to be more intentional about what opportunities should we go after, right? And what is the timing of that? Like when we look at forecast or our capture data, right? What is this customer buying? When do they usually buy it? How often do they buy it? And how does that align with our strategic and financial objectives? And I think we have to look at it that way, right? Because we know that how fast does the government process invoices? I can say faster, but not as always as fast as we would like to for cash flow, right? And then if you have an IDIQ or BPA, we're not for sure when we're going to get it. So how are you actually strategizing those unknowns with your capacity and cash flow so that you are ready financially if you need to staff or acquire resources and you can maintain your business, right? And that ties into the government's confidence level, right? So, because, as you have confidence indicators in this clarity report. And then, when I was in contracting working on source selection teams too, it was about confidence. It was about risk. The government doesn't want to award to a contractor that they've got to where it might go out of business because the pricing wasn't realistic or they can't afford to maintain the resources that are necessary. So it's not just what you know, but how effective are you in your operation and being able to afford to stay compliant.
Right. I love that you brought that up because I think it really speaks to the environment really pushing for, more sophistication, I would say, in like
Mhm.
assessing pipeline health, right? So you don't want to just have a bunch of stuff in there.
Mhm.
You have to be more strategic about
Yeah. Mhm.
actually vetting and making sure that you can rise to the occasion of that and
Right.
being honest with yourself in
Yes.
terms of capacity and expertise and
Mhm.
customer intelligence and all of those things.
Mhm.
So I love that you brought that up. It's a nice little segue into parts of the report that really focused on BD and kind of finding those opportunities. And all of the report, once folks see it, they'll see that the theme here was really kind of speed versus control.
Right. Yes.
And, we're looking at shorter acquisition timeframes, faster proposals. You got to do your pricing faster. You have to execute
Mhm.
faster. And then
Mhm.
you're also doing that with a lot more scrutiny from the
Yes.
administration into where
Mhm.
every dollar is going, performance, all of that. And we
Right.
saw in the study that, contractors are prioritizing, teaming and really looking at their
Mhm.
capture strategies. But it also flagged, concerns around speed without control and the risks that
Yes.
that brings up around defending your pricing, how it
Mhm.
impacts your win rates, your auditability, and all of that.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, in your conversations, what are the biggest kind of BD opportunities that are being left on the table? Not specific contract opportunities, but opportunities to kind of shore up pipeline issues or capture
Mhm.
issues or whatever. What are
Mhm.
you hearing?
I love this part. I mean,
Me too.
used to say, I don't like sales, but how can you be a business owner and not be in sales, right?
Right.
It's relationship building and knowing what to do with the data. So, first I want to say that I think some people don't really understand what capture is. If they hear,
Mm.
oh, capture, especially small and mid-sized, they're like, we don't do that. And I'm like, yes, you do. Right? Because capture is about gathering data and assessing the
Mhm.
data to see how it fits into your customer profile. What are their needs? It's one thing to understand a mission and the need, but you've got to understand the priorities because that drives different decisions. It drives the trade offs they're willing to make in pricing and negotiations, in task and timelines. So you have to understand what is the mission, what is the need, what is the priority, and how do they have to operate, right? Is it locally? Are these some agencies more locally focused and decentralized like the VA? Are they regional, national, international? So understanding, I think sometimes people minimize the power of the data. There is so much data, right? Like,
Right.
Deltek, you've got reports, things that come from webinars. One surprise that, when I'm working with my clients, they're usually surprised on is I always ask them, give me some examples of RFPs that you've bid or that are good fits and maybe you passed on. That is data, right? Even if you
Right.
didn't bid on it because you didn't have enough time or whatever the reason, if that's your targeted customer, that is data for you. Right? You get more information about specific departments, specific needs. There may be even some key personnel information or pricing data. If you go to section H in the RFP, you'll see unique requirements, which is always important, right? A lot of businesses with a quick pass of the RFP, they quickly go to section C, statement of work or description of services, right?
Mhm.
Then section H, are there any unique requirements? Or J, with the templates and attachments, and then the proposals and instructions. But look at that. That's all important. For example, I have one of the exercises we do is we take that data and we have an AI workflow and GPT review. And we say, okay, based upon a simple prompt, based upon this review, what are the trends and priorities and key requirements as well as evaluation criteria that, let's say, the Department of Health and Human Services has when it comes to medical billing or something like that. But just you can group all that together, and that's data that you can capture, right? And then when an RFP comes up that you're going to bid on, you can integrate what you know into a competitive, unique value proposition to help you stand out. So I think, one, don't minimize the data that you have available, whether it's a proposal you won, a debriefing from a proposal that was lost, or a good fit that you just didn't have the opportunity to bid. It's all there, right? Now we have, with the revolutionary for our overhaul, we have practitioner albums. Did you see anything in there that could be helpful? Like with the pricing section, there is a cost and price analysis workbook. Look at that. They're telling you in public information how the government conducts reviews on price and cost analysis, right? And when I was on the government side, a lot of training on that. Big, right? Even when I would teach contract pricing to the government contracting officers, that was a 2-week class. So you now have a workbook. You can take this information, and this is part of where AI can come in and make it easier for you, all business sizes. You can put those kind of tools in a workbook and say, hey, I am a contracts manager, or I'm learning how to conduct pricing. Help me complete a checklist or a guide to prepare this for my organization on this particular bid. There's so many things you can do, right? And with AI, if you don't know, then the question then becomes, what information do you need from me for better results? So we have all of this information. And I think if we bridge that together with AI, with business development, with relationships, everyone will be able to compete off of their unique skill sets and these data sets. I think we really now have to get better at using the data. And then the other process you mentioned was, I believe you mentioned acquisition review. We know that there are more innovative ways available to contracting officers to make award decisions, right? We see, yes, they are using AI to evaluate proposals, moving more toward oral proposals, right? Reviewing, hey, you have the capability. We're going to bring you in, that you've been shortlisted, and making awards that way. In some of the newer contract vehicles, you see where they're allowing you to bid without asking for pricing. And why is that? Because the government has its own market research, a good pool of pricing data that they feel is substantial enough to negotiate from those kind of objectives. So I think we have to be more savvy and strategic about how do we use this data to create an intentional pipeline where we can increase our win probability, but also get better at understanding our customer.
I love that. I mean, obviously, being in government for almost 20 years, I'm a data girl.
Yes.
I'm a little biased, but I really do think that really learning how to use that data to your advantage is key, not just for like you said, just kind of the RFP and looking through that, but when you start to look across RFPs, you start to learn more about, like, what is the real problem that agencies are trying to solve for, right? Because we know this. A lot of times they'll ask for something, but that's not the resolution to what their real problem is. And I remember doing interviews with government folks for many years, and they would always say, we need contractors to understand what our problems are. And when we're not asking for the right thing, tell us what we should be asking for. And I think you get that from really understanding the data. So I love that you brought that up. That's such good advice. I want to circle back to pipeline a bit, because I brought up kind of pipeline health. And I'm wondering your thoughts on kind of that sweet spot when it comes to really good health assessment of your pipeline in terms of quality versus volume. For several years, we've asked in the Clarity Report kind of what the pipeline multiple should be. So, you know, what multiple of pipeline do you need to kind of maintain your current revenue? Is it 2 times or is it 3? We've heard up to 10. I know this year, I think the average was between 2 and 3 times. So what are your thoughts on kind of what a good pipeline looks like?
I would agree with that, between 2 and 3 times.
Okay.
And I've always advised people 10 and a minimum. Now, and
Mm.
remember spoke about those 3 phases of the contract life cycle: pre-award, award, and post-award. Have you ever seen an RFP get canceled? Have you ever seen an RFP get delayed? So if you're not 2 to 3 times, you're not going to have much left. So it's not just about being intentional with the opportunities that you're going after. It's being wise enough to cover for the variance if an RFP is delayed or if it doesn't come out at all. Or, oh,
Yeah.
by the way, if they change the requirements and they want to make an award off of a GSA schedule or off of OASIS or a small business set aside, you've got to be prepared for those shifts, which is also why relationship building is so important, right? If you have a true, genuine connection and relationship and your work speaking with the buyer and program management, those are the kind of shifts that you can help navigate, right? And build trust that it's better to, have a requirement in this way, because we know that adequate competition drives down price. So the more qualified vendors that are willing to participate and provide a response, the better that is for everyone, the government and the contractors. So relationships are important. And then I also want to say this about the pipeline is look at when you're looking at the pipeline, you're not just looking at, look at what kind of contract it is. What is the period of performance, right? When are you going to receive payment? All this is important because of what? Cash flow. Cash is
Mm-hmm.
still king, right? And is your revenue captured accurately? I used to do some work with a large international testing organization, and I work with them and help build up the pipeline and everything. And they're like, "Oh, awesome, great. So how much are we going to get every month?" Right? So the challenge was getting them to understand, hey, this is an IDIQ, right? Or this is a BPA. This is not a every month kind of revenue. So having a realistic perspective on how does this affect my bottom line? So what contract, and look at your contract mix. What contracts if I win, is it actually going to help my cash flow on a revenue basis and greatly affect my capacity and operations on a day-to-day level? And which contracts am I accounting for that have a little more, unknown about them in terms of timing and flexibility? I think people need to look at the pipeline that way. Don't just say I've got 10 contracts or 10 opportunities in my pipeline. What do they look like? Are we talking IDIQ? Are we talking steady revenue or projected? Because indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. Are we talking
Right.
steady revenue or I've got a BPA, so I'm going to have to compete for task or delivery orders. So really drilling down in the pipeline too, because you need a healthy mix. And then looking at your pipeline and customers and saying, if we lose this customer, what happens to our business? Right? Because we need a diversified portfolio. If 80% of your work is coming from one customer, you need to do something, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you were to lose work or lose that contract, what happens to your business? So looking at it from all those perspectives and meeting with the core people, the curious, the creative, the innovative, those that understand the customer, that capture data, and being more intentional and strategic about the pipeline. Customer type, customer mix, contract type, and timing, I think, and pricing structures are really
Right.
important.
Right. Yeah, I love that you threw contract type in there because with the RFO and every recent executive order,
Mm-hmm.
fixed price versus cost plus and time and materials and all that's a big part of the mix to look at the balance in your pipeline there as well, right?
Right.
So I'm going to shift gears a bit, and we will come back to diversification, but you mentioned early on about compliance, and that is such a huge area for many different reasons. Like, so in many cases, that's an area that stops some businesses from even entering the federal government. It's kind of looking at that
Yes,
compliance
it's scary.
environment. It's a lot of times why contractors' costs are increasing. It's and their just ability to compete if they do decide to be in the market. And so
Mhm.
we asked a lot about compliance and clarity. And this year, cybersecurity obviously is the
Oh, yeah.
number one audit risk area in the whole study.
Mhm.
The cybersecurity maturity model certification, CMMC, applicability keeps climbing. This year, we saw about 59% of folks saying yes, that applies to my organization.
Yes.
And that's up from 55% last year. And we
Mhm.
saw that the costs are rising and the margin for error is shrinking. So I'm interested in what you've been hearing from your clients about CMMC. It's obviously, it's been coming for years and years and years, right? We've all been watching it. This past November, I think it kind of phase one kind of kicked in. So what is the reality on the ground for your clients in terms of how they're looking at and preparing for CMMC?
So most people are preparing. So I want to say this. So when it comes to cybersecurity, maturity model certification, it affects everyone, right? This is based upon the Department of Defense, Department of War now. And what I hope people are also recognizing, and this has always been the issue, a lot of time policies will come specifically from our military agencies, but eventually it transitions to the civilian agency side. So pay attention. Cybersecurity is definitely one of those things because it's always been a matter of these three things. How is the data protected at rest? How is the data protected in use? How is the data protected in transmission? And if an organization and its people really think of it from those three things, that is going to help you identify gaps, resources, areas in which you need to be around, that you need to build your foundation around. So I think CMMC, as more people implement it and are reviewed by it and lessons are learned, is going to continue to change. And we'll see some similar talks about that more on the civilian agency side. A couple of years ago, I actually spoke with someone from the Department of it was Department of Defense at that time that looked at the SIPRs, SPRS, to looked at those, initial IT assessments that companies voluntarily submit to start that whole process, right? And because I had to report a breach, and so I called him. I said, "Hey," I said, "what are you guys seeing now?" I'm going to ask the question. And after this year, he said, "You'd be surprised. Most of what we get is from phishing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that there have not been some big areas with cybersecurity. Most of it is phishing. Clicking a link that you receive from email that looks like, people they're getting pretty good. That looks like it's real from your organization or looks like it's real from the government. So I think everyone at a baseline, that level one process, just basic management and risk review and reduction of malware, spyware, and phishing goes a long way. And as always with compliance and government, document.
Oh,
What are your
absolutely.
policies and procedures? Who is responsible from what? What data do you have? What systems does it touch? Who has access to that information? Who has, levels of authority regarding that information? I think that's all important when it comes to cybersecurity. And of course, when you're using AI, how is that affecting all of that? What level of risk does AI add to the cybersecurity perspective? What human factors do we have involved in that checking the checker? Even if it's automated workflows, there should be a human checking it. We should
Right.
understand how this all works together across our offices. And then the last thing I want to say related to CMMC is what I see is now it's also becoming a part of a lot of RFP requirements, especially when it comes to government
Yeah.
vehicles, right? Like GSA maps, or, that's out, or even OASIS. There are some instances where the government says we will give you additional scoring points because we have scoring RFPs, right? And the non-scoring RFPs. We'll give you additional scoring points if you have a CMMC certification, you have an approved government pricing system, or you're ISO certified. So the next thing is looking at it from what certifications do I need in my business if I'm going to scale and grow? So following or aligned with CMMC is a level of ISO certification. How is your cost and pricing system set up in terms of creating prices, estimating, and submitting invoices to the government? All of that works together. And because all of that is data on your system that is transmitted, that's underneath that CMMC hood. And we, I think, need to be prepared for that as well.
Absolutely. I love that you just mentioned that the idea that, especially in this environment, compliance isn't just compliance and checking the box. It's also a competitive differentiator now, right?
Yes, very much so.
And so having that CMMC or whatever certification it is that may or may not be like required in the RFP, but if you have it, looking at how that investment can help you in multiple ways, right, with compliance and
Exactly.
differentiation. So
It's an
I love that you
investment.
brought that.
Yeah,
What?
it's definitely an investment. Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I'm hearing from a lot of small businesses about the cost of it. But in terms of compliance, compliance function, we know that a lot of small and mid-sized companies don't necessarily have a dedicated compliance function or even a
Hmm.
compliance person. So what advice do you give those kind of companies to kind of stay on top of that, even if they don't have like a formal structure around it?
I would set up an automatic notification for updates related to FAR, policy,
Mm,
and executive orders related to my industry, my business, and my customers. Just having that will at least help you stay knowledgeable. I would identify experts in that area that discuss policy and interpretation and be a part of their, weekly announcements and so forth. That is something that I do because I read policy every morning because it's changing so
same.
much, right? You've got to be careful. Here's how it affects business too. You can start out with a group of policies at the solicitation phase. And then by the time it closes, there could be some other changes that you need to make note of, operational wise, compliance wise. And then post award, right? So looking at the entire contract life cycle, you need a steady review on the policy and what it means. I would do that as a small business. That's something easy that you can do. When you take that data, you could also then put it into an AI tool and ask AI, look at this information based upon what you know about my organization. What policies and procedures should I have in place? What kind of things should I watch for? Similar to if you were to use AI to review an RFP, right? I ask it about the key requirements and a compliance matrix, but I always say also identify anywhere in this document where it says will, shall, must, cannot, and create a list from that because that's very important. Okay. So
Yeah,
there's
great
things that you
advice.
can do and set up automatically and then link that to a review on your procedures or identify where you don't have anything in writing and just keep building from it. Because remember I said the RFP is data, right? So use your other data and say, okay, this is how we might need to change our standard operating procedures, but write something and identify what data do I need, who needs to access this, what system should this be managed in, and go from there.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Such great advice. Thank you. I'm enjoying listening to you.
Thank,
Let's shift.
thank you.
Well, you kind of segued a bit for me to AI. So
Hmm.
you called this out. It jumped out at me in clarity as well, which is this AI governance gap, right? So this interesting finding, again, stopped me as well that 90% of contractors are either currently using AI or they're planning to in at least one
Hmm.
business function. And so in
Hmm.
clarity, and once folks see it, you can see we ask AI questions of about 8 or 9 different roles in a government
Hmm.
contracting organization, from BD to IT and security. And
Hmm.
that adoption is very high. I mean, just for Gen AI
Hmm.
alone, the adoption is above 90%. But there seems to be, as you mentioned, a little bit of the cart before the horse going on.
Yes.
Only 5% said that their AI maturity was fully developed. Over half
Hmm.
are still in that initial or development
Hmm.
stage for developing AI governance models. And nearly half say that they can't measure the ROI of their AI investments. So the adoption's real. The governance isn't quite keeping up, which
Right,
creates
right.
this risk, right? Especially as
Hmm.
contractors are using it in pricing and proposals and all the things that you've mentioned. So when you hear that 90% AI adoption, is that matching what you're seeing with your customers? It really is everybody's using it day to day, do you think?
Well, I'm smiling because that's such a loaded question. You know, when I start speaking on AI, I always remind people ChatGPT doesn't mean AI. There are different tools to AI that are
Right.
created every day, all the time. The more well-known tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and some other things, right? We have so many different ones, but I want everyone to remember AI is generative pre-trained transformer. That's what ChatGPT stands for. But all tools share that foundation, which is AI tools are to create solutions, right? Help with innovation. Generative means that it is taking the data that it has access to. It is learning from that data. It is learning from what you're doing with that data, and it is transforming it into an output that you will be able to use, right? In a variety of forms. So the other key factor is that AI mimics the human mind. Okay. So if
Absolutely.
AI mimics the human mind, it is learning and it is transforming. What does that mean for your organization? And this is where the risk of hallucinations and errors come from, and why it's so important to have human oversight and accountability, right? If it's mimicking the mind and it's learning from data, which could be wrong, which could be too old, we're going to have garbage in that leads to garbage
Mhm.
out. We don't want that. So to me, governance definitely has to be based upon, you have to identify, intentionally in your organization, where are there some gaps in routine tasks that we can start out using AI in a simple format on a small scale of how we might be able to use it, identify the AI tools that best fit that. Then you're going to say, okay, where are we using AI in our organization? Who is using AI? Right? Because governance also needs to be about who can use AI. We can't have everybody using AI, putting everything into it. Who can use AI? What data is allowed to be input into these large language models, right? Do we need to create our own large language model? How are we sanitizing the data before we use it? Then we're looking at what kind of impact will the use of this tool have on our organization? That's where the measurement of the ROI comes from, right? So the form, the fit, the function. And then is it really saving time? Right. And if you have, let's say you create some automations and workflows and prompts, who's creating those prompts? Are people using the same prompts? I think that needs to be a part of governance too. How are you allowing people to use this information? And what specific instructions do you have related to that? There are some key things such as compliance and pricing. I definitely would want a set of prompts to guide people through. Now, as a start, and then they can build from there, right? They can ask additional questions. They are analyzing the information using those critical thinking skills to make an assessment. And we're looking at the output. The AI is the first draft. That's got to be part of the governance too. Don't just take the data and run with it. We still have to analyze the accuracy of the data. So I don't think, and also in that regard with AI, I'm not going to say, oh, AI is terrible with data, it hallucinates. No, you have an obligation to verify the data and the resources. We've always had that obligation. I mean, when I was in college and high school, anytime I wrote a paper, I had to document my sources, verify that they were credible. And it's the same thing. It's just on a larger scale and faster now. And we have a way to increase, have guardrails for that. So who's going to use this? How are we going to start? What data are we going to have in our system? What kind of authority and access and levels of approval? Which systems is this going to have access to? You don't want it going everywhere and deleting entire databases or things, that we have seen. So I think, and then the form and the fit, start out small and then scale. We have to be really careful about that.
Careful about that. Yeah. You just answered my next two questions. That's
Oh,
such a good, thorough, because I was going to ask, what kind of guardrails do you think should be there? And how would you advise your customers that are,
mhm,
just getting into the governance phase? And I
right.
think you gave us a really good foundation for that.
Hmm.
And, ongoing learning because it's changing so
Right.
fast,
Right.
right? So everyone knows about AI hallucinations. I don't know if everyone knows about AI flattery and
Yes,
mirroring
and
and
that's the
all of the
two
different
trends.
things and having training that is up to speed with the
Mhm.
technology evolution. So I
Right,
think that's such great advice to kind of
right.
learn, but be a little bit conservative at first until you can kind of get your
Mhm.
arms around it. So
Right, and I have
thank
an
you for that.
acronym. You're welcome, that I love when it comes to the data, and this also helps with that flattery piece, and I'm gonna spell it instead of say it the other way.
Okay.
I'm gonna say crop, but it's actually CRAAP, right? When you're
Okay.
analyzing your data, is it current? Right? Is it relevant based upon what you want to use it for? Is it from someone of authority that you know is reputable, knowledgeable authority in this space, right? Is it accurate? How do you know it's accurate? And what was the purpose that that data was created for? So when you ask it to show resources, which most tools do, which is why I love Perplexity for deep research. Check all those things out. When it cites a resource, do that CRAAP, right? And then build from there. Also, you can have, even some people are more advanced where they have agents, right? AI agents,
Hmm.
which are AI work staff, but they're agents that are doing certain tasks, right? Have the agents check each other. That's another guardrail,
Interesting.
right? That's, have it set up where you can conduct the work and it's only allowed to use the data that you upload with it. So, in each of these different tools or our own tech stack, we can create a project folder and it's only to operate from within those documents. That's
Mm.
another guardrail, right? And then we are having people check it, or we're having another agent check it, or there's different ways in which we can do that. And then sometimes I even work backwards. Like, I love Gamma AI. It creates presentations just like this. I will put in a prompt. It gives me some information. Automatically, I've got slides with pictures and references, and I'll just go look at those sometimes and say, I didn't even think about that. Let me go back and
Hmm.
check that. So use them in combination with each other. And different tools are better at different things and give different output. That's perfectly okay. And if your organization uses different AI tools than someone else, that is perfectly okay as well. It has to fit your need, your organization, and how your infrastructure is set up. And then
Right.
for the return on investment, if we can't measure it, is it real? There should be a way that we can set up objective criteria to measure, is this working? Is it creating more work? Are there a lot of errors? And doing it that way. We have to be able to measure it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been talking about diversification. I'm finally at it because I want to go back to what you said about that. One of the clear signals that we saw in Clarity this year and last year actually was that
Mhm.
contractors are looking to diversify. So that can
Oh,
be
yeah.
across agencies, across contract vehicles, into different areas of public sector, state, local education markets,
Mhm.
to build resilience. And you talked about that earlier, that I think you said if 80% of your revenue is coming from one customer, you might have you might have a problem. So that was, you already answered kind of one of those questions. But what advice would you give to a contractor that realizes, like, I've got to do some kind of diversification pivot here?
Mhm. Mhm.
How do they go about determining the best strategy? Is it product? Is it agency customers? Is it something else? What advice would you give to
Right.
start that
It's
process?
It's a lot of different things. You've got to look at the data, right? Where's the market going? How are your customers shifting? That's why I said looking at RFPs, even if you didn't bid on them, looking at agency forecasts, that's important. Another thing I think people don't realize is what a wealth of information GSA is. Everyone always says, okay, I don't need a scheduler, I do. GSA is so much more than that. Right? There's
Yeah.
technology and transformation, right? There's now, and they've also just recently reorganized, right? So you have a group that is focused on innovation. You have a group that is focused on, looking at strategic sourcing, a group that is focused on, do what other vehicles do we need? A group that is focused on helping organizations with their acquisition, which, oh, by the way, GSA has been doing these things for years. GSA is good at market research, gathering the data, I will say. Now, how they use that, that's a little different, but the data is there. If you simply went to buy.gsa.gov and look at some of the information, right, the guides that they provide for buyers to use, the pricing information that you can see, and then understanding with pricing, when you're looking at pricing data, you've always got to make adjustments for current market conditions, right? But we've really got to get good at looking at the data and using the resources available to us so that we understand where we gain clarity on this is where I am based upon my skill set and how my company is evolving. This is where I can go. Right. So like GSA Acquisition Hallway also has contract forecasting. You don't have to have a GSA schedule to use this data. So use the data from government, like the industry briefings, the RFPs from GSA, and get a real picture of where is it heading, right? What different offices fall within that agency, right? So when you're working with DHS, what are the key mission objectives of the other agencies that fall under DHS? Same thing with Health and Human Services. There are still some lists of primes and subcontractors. What kind of work do they do? How are they merging? What do those M&As look like? What kind of skill set are they looking for? And create a plan around that really fits with your unique space and capabilities. Don't try to be like everyone else. And then when you're clear on those things, getting your pricing together, and your price is your price, because you don't want to win work and lose money, right? Even if you're not making a lot of money, maybe strategically is to gain experience and build relationships, but you don't want to lose money, right? It's very hard to get it back up. It's not an easy one-to-one. Like if we take a cut here, we'll get it back with this. Now, well, there's the lost opportunity cost, right? So it's so many other things to factor in. So we really got to be strategic about that. But diversify based upon what's happening in the industry and how the industry is headed. Diversify based upon the core initiatives that the current administration has that they want to focus on. And diversify based upon the mission needs and priorities that your targeted customers are moving toward.
Absolutely. All great information. So in this
Thank
interest of time, I'm going to close the loop here for us, but I'm thinking back through everything you kind of shared with us today.
Mhm.
And I think it comes back to this idea of, and really why we do the clarity study is that you can't make decisions in a vacuum. You can't
Right.
make them based on gut instinct or what used to be the standard. You
Mhm.
have to be agile, right? And change
Yes.
with the environment and know how to calculate the impact of the environment into your strategy, basically.
Mhm.
So my last question is, and you've already given us so much, but if you think through the clarity report, and if you could give a GovCon leader, like one strategic directive that they can leave after they watch this podcast and do this quarter,
Mhm.
what would that be?
Slow down enough to be intentional about identifying strategic opportunities that you can maintain and scale. And then
Okay.
looking at those relationships that you need to build and maintain, as well as your pricing, right? Looking at all of those together and and of course that goes with your teaming and government vehicle strategy. But slow down enough to be intentional so that you gain clarity about where you need to go, what steps you need to take to get there, and how you're going to maintain that and scale.
That's a wonderful way to end our conversation. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure
Thank
talking to
you.
you, such a wealth of
Thank
information.
you.
And thank you, everybody who's watching this podcast. I just want to let people know if you go to deltek.com/clarity, you can access the 17th annual GovCon industry study. Visit govwin.com for all of my team's analysis on pretty much everything we've talked about here. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you for joining. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.